Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. I've got my teacher voice on now. Thank you very, very much for joining us this afternoon for another wonderful Brown Bag Lecture Series here at the Kearney Public Library. As always, we are very grateful to the Kearney Public Library, and particularly Christy, for organizing these events and allowing us to kind of share the work that we're doing, and then, more importantly, the work that our students are doing here at UNK. Just to kind of do just a little bit of announcements, and then I'll turn it over to John. We have a full bevy of talks scheduled out through June of next year, and there's flyers for the January talk. It'll be on January 14th, and it will be me talking about someone an obscure historical figure who's very, very weird and fascinating, which are the best kind, America's only hobo millionaire, who you'll just have to come and find out about who this gentleman is. So that's January 14th. In February, we're going to have Dr. William Stoudemire share some of his work, and then on March 11th, we're going to have Dr. Hannah Lottie talking about America and the Holocaust. And so the full schedule is available in the library newsletter, also on the library website, also on the university calendar and other places online. I also want to just kind of make you aware that we're going to be doing a lot of fun and exciting programming now this next year in conjunction with the Kearney Public Library. As you all assuredly know, because you're all good history students, this year and then next year is the 250th anniversary of the United States. And so we've been working with the public library and other organizations in the community, and so there will be a number of events and other things that we are going to be bringing to you to kind of, as we kind of work through the commemorations this next year. So stay tuned for that. We're getting things on the calendar and getting things prepped. The other thing to make you all and just have on your calendar as well, as UNK has the very significant opportunity. We're going to be hosting an exhibit at the Calvin T. Wright Library beginning in February 5th and ending on March 19th from the U.S. Holocaust Museum. And it's an exhibit on America and the Holocaust. We will be having programming here at the public library, at the university, and then also be bringing in school groups and others to see the exhibit. So we're very, very honored that we were the only institution in Nebraska selected for this. And so I encourage you all, when the exhibit is at Calvin T. Ryan Library, it'll be on the second floor of the library, to please come and visit and come to that programming. And so we will be also, as things are announced now in the new year, please stay tuned for that. Now, it is my great honor today to introduce our speaker, John Klintworth. John is from Kearney, Nebraska. He graduated from high school at Medicine Valley High School, received his Bachelor of Arts. He's a very proud Chadron State Eagle, where he majored in history and minored in legal studies. But then we'll be graduating. We're very, very happy to say we'll be graduating next Friday with his master's degree in public history. And will then unfortunately be leaving us and going to Salina, Kansas. Well, he will become the curator of education at the Smoky Hill Museum in Salina, Kansas. This is, John is, and I will take off my professorial tweed for a little bit and put on my Trails and Rails board member hat, I guess, and say, John is really an exceptional public historian. This is a discipline that comes with a lot of service, a lot of dedication, and a commitment to working with the community. And I can attest, as I know a great many of our volunteers are here and some of our other board members, John is the hardest working person on our staff. Is always there to help, always there to give a tour, always will know what to fix or where something is at, and will never have to be asked to do anything. And it really is the epitome of the types of students that we have here. So he's going to be a loss to our department and to the museum. We're very, very happy. We've had him for a little bit. So.
Thank you, Dr. Ty. Hello, everyone. Some of you have probably seen me speak already. I did Fab Friday last month.
and I talked about some of the Civil War veterans that we have buried in our cemetery. So this will kind of be in the same vein as that. We'll be talking about a couple of different ways that Kearney has memorialized its Civil War veterans. So they did that through combinations of things. In September of 1888, they hosted a Grand Army of the Republic reunion here in town. It was billed as the largest gathering of people that Kearney's ever supported. And then they also built a soldiers monument in 1910. So this is what we'll talk about today. So a little preview of what the Grand Army of the Republic reunion was. So it was a statewide reunion. So we hosted all of the different departments and posts located within the state. So the Grand Army of the Republic was the Civil War version of the Veterans Legions. So each town with Civil War veterans started a post, and then they would usually have a hall where they could go and gather. Kearney actually had two. There was Cedric Post number 1, which was actually the first GAR post in the state. It was founded before there was actually a State Department, so they were underneath the Department of Illinois. And then there was the Smith-Gavitt Post, number 95, I believe. But like I said, this is a statewide reunion. Previous reunions have been held in Lincoln, Omaha, and Hastings. There was a lot of promotional efforts by boosters in Kearney. This included lobbying by the prominent citizens. They had to talk to all parts of the War Department to get released regular Army troops to come to town. They wanted to have what was known as a camp of instruction, where regular Army troops would come, set up a camp, and then they'd spend a month doing different training activities. They ended up getting that. They wanted to receive 10,000 regular Army troops to the city. They actually only ended up with 3,000, but that still will be the largest gathering of regular Army troops past the Civil War and before the Spanish-American War. And then they also convinced the railroads to offer half fare, so you could have half price tickets to come to town and leave during the week of the reunion. So we'll start talking with Camp Brook, which was that camp of instruction. Colonel Wheaton, he was in charge of the troops here. He was the colonel of the 2nd Infantry Regiment, which was stationed at Fort Omaha. He was actually in Kearney, the area previously. In 1864 and 1865, he was stationed at Fort Kearney. So he was in the area previously, so this is a little bit of homecoming for him. They gathered troops from Forts D.A. Russell, Fort Sidney, and Fort Omaha. D.A. Russell is Wilson Air Force Base, I believe now, in Cheyenne or Laramie, one of the Wyoming towns. And then Fort Sidney is in Sidney, Nebraska, and then Fort Omaha is in Omaha, Nebraska. They all started marching from those respective forts in early to mid-August, so they could arrive here by September 1st, where all of them did arrive except for Colonel Wheaton. He was tasked with going to Norfolk to review Iowa State Militia troops. So he ended up being a little late and he got here on the 2nd. So the camp location, it was located south and west of the city. 3,000 troops arriving, you're gonna need a lot of space for those. And this, like I said earlier, this was the largest gathering of troops since the Civil War. So this is a map of Kearney in 1890. One of the newspapers that I found that talked about this said the camp was located 250 yards east of the overflow stream from Lake Kearney, a mile and a half south of Lake Kearney, a mile and a half north of the Platte River, and then about a quarter mile west of the city suburbs. So on this map, you got Lake Kearney here, river down here, the canal kind of comes down like this. And so about in this area would have been where the camp was located. It was kind of called Camp Kenwood as well, so like the Kenwood area of Kearney is where this camp was located. So the troops here, this is a photo of some of the junior officers that were here. So with 3 regiments of troops, you're going to have a bunch of lieutenants, second lieutenants, and captains, and a little dog.
Big dog. Big dog. There's several like that. It's a cow.
Yeah, but their first week, their duties included training and policing, mounting guards, and then they did small unit parades, so think company size. The second week began large unit drill, up to the size of a brigade, which was that 3,000 troops. The reason they needed these camps of instructions was because usually at these forts you'd only have 2 or 3 companies, up to 5 or 6, so you couldn't do these large scale drills that were needed during like large scale wars. So you couldn't have a brigade gathered in one of these little frontier forts and do brigade size drills because there just weren't the troops there. So then the third week, they drilled in construction and engineering duties. This included construction of shelter trenches, rifle pits, abatis, fascines, and gabions. So that's kind of what those photos show. The top right side is abatis. Below that are the fascines and then the gabions. So fascines are just twigs bundled up that hold back dirt, and then gabions are like containers that you put dirt in to help stop incoming fire. Then the fourth week, the troops all drilled in attacks and defense of convoys, reconnaissance, passages of defiles, and the crossing and defending of streams. So during all of these weeks, they were also doing mock battles, they were doing crazy reconnaissance out into the sand hills, just doing all sorts of trainings to try and get these troops ready for any kind of battle that would arise or potentially arise. Also, during the first and second week, they knew that there was going to be a whole bunch of people coming into town, so they started working on constructing a tent city in Kearney. To this map. So during the time that they were, the first and second week of September, they knew they were going to have to build more housing for people because there weren't enough hotel rooms for all of the expected visitors. So up here on this empty spot of land, they covered that in a tent city. Tent city would eventually be an entire square mile, just to house the expected amount of people. Other things they were doing, like I said, mock battles. So they would fight different units within the camp of instruction. So they had one regiment fighting another regiment. They would have companies fighting different companies, just trying to get these soldiers trained in a way that could simulate battle but wouldn't have anyone's lives actually in danger. Another thing they were doing was they were testing a new model of entrenching tool. So this picture that's down here kind of shows what one of the junior officers who was tasked with testing that entrenching tool had his soldiers do. So he first had them dig, this is a little drawing that he made, so they had them dig out this little trench, and then they put a berm up there, and then once they were done with that, they had them dig out even more of it and create that, and then they were timing them how long it took them, and just seeing how this entrenching tool worked. Unfortunately, they did not like the tool. It was part shovel, part pickaxe, and there was a screw that they had to put into the two to connect it, and that screw would often come loose when they were trying to dig into the ground or other uses of it. And then when they lost that screw, the tool became useless. So they offered some feedback to the company, and then they also sent letters to the Army saying, yeah, don't buy this because it doesn't really work. So then that's pretty much what happened at Camp Rook. Then the Grand Army of the Republic, their reunion was that third week of September. Estimated between 40 and 50,000 people would eventually visit the city, remember at this time, Kearney was only about 10,000 people, so 4 to 5 times the amount of citizens would be coming into the city. Like I said, all of the hospital or hotel rooms filled up quickly. They even filled up that tent city that they built, and they had to have people sleeping in the backs of wagons and on the streets during the high points of their time in town. Another little thing that was happening in town at the same time, they were hosting the county fair, so just a little extra entertainment and a little extra chaos.
Throw it all in there.
So then here's a list of what was going on at the camp reunion. So the tent camp was called Camp Morrow. Henry Morrow was the colonel in charge of the 21st Infantry Regiment, which was the one that came from Fort Sidney. His troops were the ones who mostly built in Tent City, so they named it in honor of him. So on Monday, around 10 o'clock, the troops from Camp Morrow turned it over to the GAR. They had a little ceremony to do that. And then they hosted a reception for the rest of the day as more and more people arrived for the reunion. On Tuesday, they went down in the morning to visit Camp Brook. They watched a grand parade of all the troops march through. Then they went back to their camp for lunch, had a meeting involving all the GAR posts, then a campfire with remarks by General Mizzard. So campfires were like just big discussions that they had, just reliving their time, the service, just conversating with different people that they probably hadn't seen for a while. Then on Wednesday, they had another grand review that was held at the regular encampment to honor the GAR troops. That afternoon, all of the ex-POWs from the state gathered and had a nice meeting for themselves to talk about what they had experienced. Then that evening, they had a reenactment of the runnings of the guns at Vicksburg on Lake Kearney. So they brought some cannons up from Camp Brook, put them on the hills overlooking Camp Kearney, and had some boats go underneath, and they shot the cannons around. Had a grand old time. And then Thursday, they had a grand parade down Central Avenue. Everyone was a part of this parade, so you had all 3,000 of the regular Army troops. You had members from the Nebraska National Guard, all of the GAR members, and then members of the women's organization. So there was a Union Daughters and all those different things. That evening, they had fireworks at the camp, and a general reception was held at the camp pavilion with the officers, and they invited all the citizens of Kearney to come up and attend. And then Friday, they had a meeting to create an organization of soldiers and sailors in Northwest Nebraska. The GAR members watched a mock battle between regular Army troops and the militia troops, again north of Kearney. And then they had a reenactment of the Battle of Hampton Roads on Lake Kearney as their evening entertainment. So here's a picture of that grand review going through the tent, through Camp Brook. So those are the regular Army troops. You can kind of see Kearney here in the background. I believe this is the old Brickyard Factory. Here's a drawing of the running of the guns. So this is kind of what they were trying to emulate on Camp Kearney. Hopefully it didn't really look like that, but I'm sure it was loud. Here's another drawing kind of showing what the vision was. This is a picture of the parade going through Central Ave. So those are the regular Army troops led by their band. Then here's a painting of the Battle of Hampton Roads. So this battle was the first battle between two ironclad ships during the Civil War. So the Union Monitor over there on the right, and then the Confederate Merrimack or Virginia here kind of in the center. Here is a photo of the Camp Morrow up there in the background, and then here's the little monitor on Lake Kearney. And then here's another picture of the monitor in the Merrimack battle. So then that's everything on Camp Brooks and Camp Morrow and the GI reunion. Does anybody have any questions to start off with? No? Okay. So then we'll talk about the Soldiers Monument. So after the Civil War, Union veterans started moving west. Many of them settled here in town, in the county, and in the state. And then in the 1890s, 1900s, 1910s, War Memorial Building explodes. Part of this reason is because most of those veterans are starting to die out, and they want to have a way of honoring and remembering those veterans when they're gone. Northern and southern monuments held different meanings for different people. So the north, it symbolized having beaten the South, but they want to reconcile the South. The meanings shows, or it helps reinforce white supremacy and the Confederate lost cause narrative. That's what I'm thinking of. So that's what those, and then there are also sites of communal grieving. So during the Civil War, more Americans died than any other war in U.S. history. A lot of those bodies also weren't able to be returned home. So for people who lost a loved one in that war but didn't have a body or a graveyard site to go and grieve them, they used these monuments as a way of remembering those people as well. So there's a couple of different types of monuments. You could actually order them online or through a catalog, not online. It was big business at that time. So this is like the Amazon of their day. The most common purchased soldier's monument was the standing soldier, so that's what the center one shows. But there's also obelisks, mounted figures. So think of like whenever a city or a town had a famous soldier, they'd usually be a general or something, and they'd be sitting on their horse. So that's what the mounted figures are. And then as the Spanish-American War was ending, and especially after World War I, hiker statues became popular. So that's just the soldier, but they're like walking. That's the difference. And then often most cities purchased common soldiers just because that would exemplify the people or the veterans of that city more than a famous soldier. But if they had a famous soldier, they definitely wanted to show off that they were from there. These statues were often a source of pride for their cities as well. Some cities actually, the people thought they would be looked down upon if they didn't have a statue memorializing their veterans. Often placed in town squares or on the busiest of streets. This is a Colorado Soldier's Monument. So there's symbolism in the statues and the directions they face. So this one is a more warlike stance. So the way the soldier's standing is different than our standing soldier over there. It's thought that when the soldier's standing there, arms rest, that he's accepting peace. But this guy obviously isn't accepting peace. He's still ready to defend the Union. Also, most northern cities have their soldiers' monuments facing south to defend against the Confederacy, while the southern states, with their soldiers' monuments, they're often facing north to defend against northern invasion. Another thing is most of the soldiers' monuments during this time were promoted by women's organizations. So Kearney's Women's Relief Corps is the one that first started organizing for our soldiers' monument, but the Daughters of Confederacy were big players in raising most southern soldiers' monuments. So talking about Kearney Soldiers Monument, Mrs. A.H. Bolton, who was the president of the Women's Relief Corps here in town, her husband was part of Sedgwick Post Number 1. In 1906, she called for a committee to be formed to raise a soldiers monument in Kearney. She called all patriotic, civics, and soldiers organizations to come together and form a committee to have one of these raised here in town. So a monuments committee was formed after that meeting. This is from a pamphlet that was handed out at the unveiling of the monument. So you can see your monuments committee up there. A.O. Thomas, he was the president of the state normal school. If you were at my last talk, you'll notice this name. You might recognize it. That's Frederick Switz. He's the guy whose gravestone is all messed up. Says he was Confederate, but he was not. J.A. Larimer and J.R. Larimer are brothers. They're both Union veterans. E.B. Fitch was also a veteran, I believe. And then C.H. Gregg and Edward Thomas were citizens representatives. But so the veterans, they represented the two Army, or the GAR posts here in town, and then they had some citizen representatives as well. And then there's city council members, and then monuments contractor down there at the bottom. But once they gave a proposal to the city, once they decided on that they wanted to support getting a soldiers monument, the city discovered that they were legally not allowed to expend public funds on the creation of a monument like this. So they needed new laws to be passed. So the city attorney, H.M. Sinclair, drafted a bill, and then this bill was introduced to the state legislature by George Barrett of Buffalo County. And that was eventually passed by the state legislature. Once that was passed, the Kearney City Council then passed an ordinance on June 7th, 1909 to expend the city funds for the monument. They asked for bids on who wanted to construct the monument, and Troop and Pruitt of Kearney won the bid for $4,300. So then on June 10th, 1910, that was the date that they expected the monument to be finished. But there was some strikes in eastern quarries, so they weren't able to get the stone. They used bar granite, I believe, to carve it or sculpt it. So then they had to push that off. They decided they needed additional men on the committee to plan the unveiling ceremony. Various locations were also offered on where to have the monument located. The cemetery was pushed forward first by mostly the women's organizations, and then Central Avenue with where it connects with 25th was also put forward. Eventually, the intersection of 25th and Central was selected as the location. That was based mostly on a petition sent by 93 veterans that supported that location as the spot for the monument. So the unveiling date was originally selected as October 27th. Then that date was selected because it was Teddy Roosevelt's birthday. Then one of the committee members, F.J. Switz, said that there was supposed to be a storm on that day. So he was then put in charge of the weather committee, and they chose to move the date to the 25th, which was the correct decision because they, in a lot of the documents that I saw, they bragged about how perfect the weather was. So if you look, this photo shows them after the unveiling, and then this photo also shows, and it's a picture of the same happenstance, just from different angles, so that's pretty cool. So then, over here is another excerpt from that pamphlet that they were handing out at the day of the unveiling, just showing how they wanted everyone to form up for the parade and where they wanted it to be located. They estimated that 15,000 people came into town for the unveiling ceremony. They all came in on the trains and from different surrounding towns. They only built grandstands for 3,000 people. So once those quickly filled, it's lucky that Central and 25th were very wide, so they provided standing room for all of the extra visitors. Then speeches and parades and music happened before and after the unveiling of the statue. So for the parade, you can see everyone's lined up, but the 2nd Regiment Band led the way, followed by over 1,000 Kearney students from the different levels of school. They had 400 representatives from the State Normal School, the cadets from the Military Academy, and Company A of the Nebraska National Guard were also involved. And then all of the GAR veterans and Spanish American War veterans that were present led up the rear with the Women's Auxiliary as well. Once the Honor Guard, which was Company A, arrived at the statue, they split and then let the GAR veterans march through the center of them up to get close to the monument. Then Norris Brown, who was a United States Senator from town, he gave the first speech. This was followed by J.E. Evans, who was a past department commander for the state of Nebraska. He was from North Platte. And then the final speaker was Captain C.E. Adams from Superior. So he was the current department commander for Nebraska. He spoke last, and he read a bunch of letters that were sent to town congratulating them on the construction of the monument. And the best, or I guess the most famous person they got a letter from was from Teddy Roosevelt, wishing them all the wonders of the world. So at 2 p.m., the monument was unveiled. This is the front of that same pamphlet showing the order of everything that was happening. Our monument today, it's still 33 feet tall, and there's 4 descriptions on the 4 cardinal directions of it. The south side says erected in honor of the defenders of our country, 1861 to 1865, and 1898 and 1900. The north side says erected by the city of Kearney, 1910, and then on the east and west sides of the column were the emblems of the Women's Relief Corps and the ladies of the GAR, because they were instrumental in gathering support for the construction of this banner. So then the monument stood there in the center of the intersection of Central and 25th. In 1938, efforts began to have the monument moved. This was because a lot of people were driving along this street. It was the busiest intersection in the city, which had a lot of vehicles driving by, and there was a habit of people running into it. The Women's Relief Corps protested. They didn't want the monument to be moved. The president claimed that this monument has stood on that spot for more than a quarter century and has been a source of civic and patriotic pride to everyone. She added that the committee in charge of the dedication, 6 Civil War veterans, had all died by this point, but if they could speak, their sentiments would be unanimous against the removal from its location. Other citizens wrote the hub and blamed all the danger on the drivers. One claimed that any hazard that it presented to drivers was the fault of the drivers or could be solved with the installation of 2 stop signs. They went on to say that anyone who hits the monument should be forced to take a detour around town because Kearney does not need them on its streets and endangering its citizens. But the protests were ultimately successful. Instead of moving the monument, the city added a fence around the base of the statue. You can see the little fence there. And the monument stood. Efforts again began to move the monument began in 1957. The monument was moved from its original location to the median of 25th between Central Ave and First Ave. This move was in part to protect the monument from being run into by motor vehicles. During this time, it was also turned to face east instead of south, or east instead of south as it originally had been. Why? They didn't say why, but it just.
I think most of the traffic came from the east.
Yeah.
He's looking at you.
So after this move, it was then again moved in 1991. In 1991, they took it down and it was stored at the airport in one of the hangars. It was moved because 25th was supposed to be widened and a left turning lane was installed precisely in the spot the monument stood. And then for the next 2 years, the monument was taken down and placed in storage at the Kearney Municipal Airport. Before they put the monument back, public input was invited by the mayor. They formed a citizens committee to look for new locations for the monument. There were supporters of a downtown location and also opponents of the downtown location. So supporters of the downtown location focused on the civic virtues of the monument, claiming that the Soldiers Monument should be re-erected in downtown Kearney, where it will be seen by thousands of people each day. The location they advanced was near the parking lot of the new Museum of Art.
Mm-hmm.
Gotta go back to the spot. Because it is representative of our ancestors' first efforts to enrich their lives with public displays of art. It is also appropriate that the museum designated as a receptacle for Nebraska's art heritage provide a new resting place of the Soldiers Monument. Their main goal was to keep the monument in a location where most people would see it and thus have it be the most visible reminder of the sacrifices of the past, of past generations as possible. The opponents of the location wanted it placed in the cemetery, and in response to that, they claimed that placing it in the cemetery would limit the monument's exposure to the handful of daily visitors and people who occasioned the cemetery on holiday, because once the statue is taken out of sight, it is also taken out of mind. Another reason they wanted it at the Mona location was because they believed that it should be as close to the original location as possible. So then supporters of the cemetery, they supported this location because the monument's placement in the cemetery would be a fitting tribute to the people who gave themselves in the defense of freedom. They were also concerned that the monument would just be considered a piece of art and that viewers would lose respect for it as a monument to the veterans. Eventually, like we all know, it was moved to the Mona parking lot. It was with a clause added in the acceptance of that Mona location that if the monument was ever going to be moved again, that the cemetery had to be considered as a place for that movement. It was rededicated on Veterans Day 1994. They actually put it back up on Memorial Day of 1994. But it was dedicated to all American veterans, not just the Spanish-American War and the Civil GAR veterans. They had a parade following the original path of that parade. But like I took a picture of that yesterday. There is a Confederate War veteran signal, or it's a metal plaque on there. But so they also attached different bronze medallions for all of the wars that the U.S. had fought in. So there's a War of 1812, there's the Indian Wars, World War I, World War II, all of them that you can think of. And then down is a little dedication that they added as well. So then it was eventually moved again once Mona was getting its expansion. They moved it in June 2022 to its present location in, what's it called, Pioneer Park, or not Pioneer Park. Called Kearney Junction Park. There we go. I didn't find as much evidence of the community involvement here. I only saw one op-ed in the Hub that supported this move to its current location because they claimed it was a perfect location because it's in a park called Kearney Junction Park, which was the first name of the city, and it sits next to the Oregon Trail marker, or the first Oregon Trail marker erected in Nebraska.
Where's that at?
It's on Central Avenue, right across the railroad tracks, right on the south side of the railroad tracks. Do you know where like Sailor Printing is? It's right there.
Which way does it face now?
Now it faces west.
Faces west, okay,
Yep.
all right.
So
One more move and he can go.
the only way it has to look is north.
Put it on the list.
Okay.
Make you rotate.
So then we get the legacy. So the symbolism of this statue, it followed national trends meant to honor Civil War veterans who were dying out at the time of its construction, and vets of its most recent of the country's most recent conflict, which was the Spanish-American War. It shows an average Union soldier, so then that shows the city's northern sympathies. And then the choice to have the monument facing south signified that the committee members recognized that the war was against their fellow countrymen, but having the soldier with his rifle at ease signifies that they've accepted peace. And then what does the monument mean today? Previous generations fought to keep the monument in one of the most prominent locations in town. Previous fears of the monument being out of sight, out of mind, possibly have come true with its new location because less people have seen it, and that could have led to its dampening of its message. And then with that, that's my presentation. So do we have any questions?
We played fast and loose with the E in Kearney.
Yes.
When did it really change over? 1910, 1900?
I'm not 100% sure on when Kearney got its E.
The spelling quandary.
Yeah, I just know it's a post office issue. So Fort Kearney was originally named after Stephen Watts Kearney, who was in the Mexican-American War. And then it's claimed now that Kearney is named after Phil Kearney, who was a Union veteran, who died in 1862. So I don't really know when it changed, but
And neither one of those Kearneys
no,
put an E in it.
no. So that's a good question. Yes.
In a couple of the pictures of the first location that the monument was, what is the building in the background of that?
That's the hotel.
Is that the hotel?
Yep, it burned
Okay.
down.
Midway.
Yeah, the Midway Hotel. Yes.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Yeah, I think it's where the Apple Mart is now.
Yep.
Any other questions?
Roughly where was the tent city located?
So, you know where Lake Kearney is, right? It was in this section up here. So just on the northeast side of the lake.
What was down there in that part?
What?
See the two,
Like down
yeah,
there?
that, what was there?
That's where Camp Brook was. So that's where the regular Army troops were stationed, and then up here is where the GR veterans had their camp. Yes.
So in 2022, when it was moved, Sarah here did a lot of work with Mr. Morgan, writing a paper, doing some research on it. And one of the things is it weighed 30,000 pounds.
Yeah.
So it was not easy to move.
I'm sure it wasn't. Yeah.
Makes you wonder how they did it the first one.
Yeah.
They didn't have a crane.
Yeah, I'm sure they had
Same way
a
they
lot of
built the
police
pyramid, too.
that lifted up there.
Like a lot of people.
When I was a kid, I asked, was Nebraska on the north or the south side of the war? And I was told, well, they weren't a state yet, so they just stand for either side. So, did you you have more Confederate soldiers here or more?
So you had a lot more Union soldiers here. So Gibbon was founded as a Union soldier, or Union veterans colony. And then at my last talk, I walked around the cemetery and documented all the veterans that I could find in there. And there's 216 Union veterans and no Confederate veterans buried in the cemetery.
Except for the one that's marked wrong.
Yeah, except for the one that's marked wrong. But Nebraska actually did send a regiment to fight in the Civil War. Proportionally, we sent the most amount of military-age troops to fight in the Civil War, just because we had such a small population that sending like 1,500 to 3,000 troops was a large portion of our population. But yeah, we did have Union troops fight in the Civil War. Yes.
And one of your slides, beginning, you mentioned a building that blew up. What would that be?
Exploded.
Exploded.
Yeah.
The actual building
I think it
didn't blow.
meant like.
The brickyard.
Oh,
Yeah, it took off.
It took off. It
Yeah,
Yeah,
took
it
off.
wasn't the building, it's like, looked like a house with the statue out in front.
I don't remember that at all, sorry.
Yeah, it says it exploded.
Yeah.
War,
It
yeah.
says the
War
building-
Memorial Building
Oh,
exploded.
okay.
It blew
So,
up.
the construction of building war memorials started, so, more and more people were building war memorials during this time. Sorry,
Blew up too.
yeah, nothing actually exploded.
We all sat here thinking.
That's a
Buildings,
good one.
we need to build
So
them.
it rapidly expanded.
Yes,
My question is with the memorial bronze, like the monumental bronze company, how many other companies were in competition to create these memorials? Do you happen to know? Like, were there like epic battles about who could design the best one?
honestly, I have no idea. But I think it's interesting that Kearney didn't decide to go with a large company. They
Yeah.
chose a local company to
Yeah.
do their monument.
Yeah.
So shop local guys.
Well, when you couple all the things that have happened with the removal of Confederate monuments in our country in the last 10 years or so, it's pretty amazing. And Kearney maybe got through peacefully compared to a lot of locations.
That was most of the Confederate ones they were
Well, I
taking down
realize
though,
that,
yeah.
There's been a lot
I was
of
gonna say,
ex-Confederates served in, at the fort, and were here.
Yeah, they had galvanized Yankees.
And they were people
at
who
Fort
settled
Kearney.
here.
Yep. Any more questions? No. Well, thank you all for coming.